Wake up, everybody. Welcome into the rebellion. I saw Shane the other day when I was in Portland, and he said, "Hey, Clayton, I'm a rebel," and he wanted to introduce himself. So welcome to all the rebels out there. Nice to see all of you guys. Welcome into Redacted. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
So glad to have you here. This is the show where we cover the stories the mainstream media largely redacts or ignores, and it's a big propaganda machine right now. We are at multiple stages of a war. So just a short time ago, the Ukrainians launched using U.S. weapons, attacked a nuclear power plant inside of Russia. Not inside of Ukraine at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that was held by Russia. No, this is inside of Russia. Putin has responded. We are watching that. We're also watching Americans trying to get out of Lebanon right now. Over 7,000 Americans trapped in Lebanon. And the United States says get out now, but there's no flights. How are they going to get out? They're basically trapped as war is increasing and exploding at this hour in southern Lebanon. So watching all of those pieces today.
Plus, the Department of Homeland Security says that terrorists can exploit the open southern border. They don't have a plan to get past it. Also, they say Russia, China, and Iran are going to do bad things to us because of the southern border. They don't prove that.
Right.
They know that it's Mexican drug cartels, but this is basically a war declaration document telling us what the problems are, not that they're going to fix it at all.
Also, we're getting new weird information on two fronts with President Trump. So President Trump warned us all last night that something was coming with Jack Smith, of course, the special counsel, the illegal special counsel prosecutor. Would there be some sort of October surprise? That happened. One judge's decision. And then we have a whole other judge deciding on the trial delay for the assassination attempt on President Trump, Ryan Routh. They say prosecutors have now uncovered a treasure trove of new evidence, and they want a delay because things have just gotten complex. The word complex is their word, not mine. So we're going to talk about that on today's show.
Plus, the far right won the vote in Austria. It's the Austria First Party, the party that actually wants the government to work for them because they have astronomical taxes. But the opposition says, well, we're not going to work with you because we don't want a right-leaning government. So the people voted them in, and yet the other politicians are saying, no, we don't like your politics. We're not playing along. Does that sound familiar? Could that be a template that we see happen across the West? We're going to talk to Ralph Scholhammer about that because he is actually in Austria.
Yeah, get rid of voters. We're hearing this new policy, like in Canada. Our friend David Craden the other day talking about that. So yeah, get rid of voters. We don't need voters anymore. Who are you? You're just in the way. You're just in the way of their agenda right now. So good to see all of you guys. Welcome into the show. Thank you guys for subscribing and being a part of our daily show here. We're live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Thursday. The world is going crazy right now. 33 days until the election, and it's amazing. After yesterday's show, it's just like my brain. It just, It's like, oh my gosh, we are all going to need a break. We're all going to need a little bit of a trip and vacation here coming up after this election. So anyway, we got a lot of news to get to today. So thank you guys so much for subscribing and being part of our show. We're going to bring in Colonel Douglas McGregor here in just a moment. But first,
we want to tell you about our friends over at Buy Optimizers because, of course, 2024 is ticking away. But did you know that you still can make positive changes? Don't wait till New Year's. Do it now so you don't feel like crap during the holiday season. And in fact, research shows that you can improve your nutrition in just 1 or 2 weeks and see the results of that. Improve your workouts in just 8 to 12 weeks. So also you can improve your sleep. You can do all of those things with Magnesium Breakthrough by Buy Optimizers. It's your secret weapon for unlocking peak performance. This groundbreaking formula harnesses 7 forms of highly bioavailable magnesium, scientifically designed to elevate your sleep, support workout recovery, and boost muscle growth. So you effortlessly, I can't say the word effortlessly, but you know what I mean. You effortlessly sleep. You can wake up bursting with energy, and you see your fitness goals materialize before your eyes. So don't let another year fade away. Seize control of your health destiny with Magnesium Breakthrough. If you use the code Redacted, you can get 10% off at checkout. So head on over to buyoptimizers.com/redacted. One more time, that's buyoptimizers.com/redacted.
Well, it seems like all hell is breaking loose. The Ukrainians just launched a missile attack against the Kursk nuclear power plant. We'll get an update on that. Meanwhile, Americans scrambling right now to get out of Lebanon. According to reports, they feel abandoned by the Biden administration as the U.S. is bracing for a wider war in Israel. Meanwhile, Iran just warned the United States a short time ago to stay out of this fight. Iran also telling the United States the restraints are off. Israel, meanwhile, for its part, is readying their response to Iran. And we're hearing reports this morning that Israeli IDF soldiers are being slaughtered in southern Lebanon. In that attack, is that attack on Lebanon backfiring right now? Let's make sense of all of this with Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He's the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. A lot happening right now. Colonel, good to see you. First, you can take any one of these topics, but I think we need to start with what's happening in Lebanon and Americans trying to get out as we speak. Thousands of Americans trapped there.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, making sense out of any of this is a tall order, because the worse the situations get in these areas, the less coherence and the less rationality seems to play into all of this. The Ukrainians launched these missiles ostensibly as an act of desperation. You know, on the one hand, they don't care about Russian lives, and frankly, they don't care about the health of Europe. You destroy and potentially damage a nuclear power plant that has implications for a large region, a large part of the world. So it's a very dumb idea. But I think it is desperation. Now, the good news is the Russians report no radiation leaks. And others in the region who are monitoring it say they don't detect any radiation leaks. So that's good news. Second part is they say they've got it under control. They've secured it. The interesting part is that so many MLRS and ATACMS weapon systems, Army Tactical Missile System, rocket artillery, have been taken under fire and destroyed over the last several days by Iskander missiles. And those missiles are hypersonic. They carry a 1,500 to 1,800 pound warhead. They're very, very precise. That the whole region of eastern Ukraine has gone silent when it comes to these missiles. So I don't know what the missiles are, and it would be interesting to find out. I don't know if these are Shadows that were provided by the British or the French version called the Scout. Perhaps that's what hit the power plant. But it's very obvious that Ukraine is losing, and losing badly. The whole front is collapsing. The Russians are advancing deliberately because, of course, they have to be alert to mines and booby traps and things that may lie in their path. Large numbers of Ukrainian soldiers are surrendering. They are, of course, being treated well as always. They're actually calling the Russians once again and saying, hey, we're finished. We have nothing left. We're ready to surrender. So that part is good news. But what's really upsetting about this act of desperation is that it's designed, I am afraid, to do to us in Ukraine what Netanyahu is doing to us in the Middle East, and that is to drag in the United States and its allies into the war. Now, nothing bad happened per se, at least as far as we know from the Russian side. But I think we're going to see more of this in the near future. We're going to see it both in Ukraine and in Russia. And what has to happen right now in Ukraine is the president needs to shut down this regime. It's dangerous. This is a careless, irresponsible action that does not represent us, is not consistent with our views as a nation and as a people. That needs to be made clear to these people in Ukraine. And I think it's time to just shut them down, say, we've had it with you. We're no longer going to support you. We're pulling out, because we don't want something like this to happen in the future and succeed.
So that's on the Russian front, and that's on what's just happened, this breaking news on this attack on this nuclear facility. Now let's turn to Lebanon, Colonel, where Americans trying to get out, upwards of 7,000 Americans trapped there who are trying to get out. The United States saying, yes, get out, but very difficult trying to get flights and trying to get these Americans out as Israel is expanding its war. This is not just a skirmish. We're hearing from the Israeli side that this is war. They are fully involved in a war in southern Lebanon at this hour. Where do things stand there before we talk about Iran? And the reports that I'm seeing this morning are showing, I'm seeing a lot, and you're not going to see this on Fox News. You're not going to see this on the major mainstream media. IDF soldiers coming up against heavy fire and being slaughtered in southern Lebanon. What's your sense of that?
Keep in mind that we do have a Marine Expeditionary Unit in the area, a total of almost 6,000 Marines. That MEU is normally an amphibious carrier, and they should be able to help evacuate people from Lebanon. Now, I don't know if that's being discussed or they've tasked the Marines to do something else, but normally I would think in such an emergency situation, that's why we maintain Marine Expeditionary Units in order to rescue American citizens from this kind of situation. I don't know what the likelihood is of flying out because I don't know who is willing to fly in and out of Lebanon. Remember, over the last few days, the Israelis have killed 7,000 people in and around Beirut. Not all of these people were associated, obviously, with Hezbollah, but that makes it very difficult for commercial airlines to fly in and pick people up. But it's a bad situation, and I don't know why we waited this long, because I think it's been pretty clear for some time now that Mr. Netanyahu was going to attack southern Lebanon. Now, as far as progress on the ground, we've got a huge problem right now, Clayton, with battle damage assessment of what actually is destroyed when explosives are used, when munitions are used, and also the casualty problem, because the Israelis have never told the truth about their losses. We've never had a clear picture of what's happened in Gaza. You have essentially a blackout for news of any kind about what happens on the front in Israel itself. They regard this as a national security matter. Fine. But the problem is when we say heavy losses, and I've been hearing the same thing from my sources, that in fact, when the special operations units went in first on the ground to try and quote unquote clear the way, they were unable to make very much progress. And in fact, many of them were severely wounded or killed. And then the troops that followed after them were subjected to the same kind of ambush tactics that the Israelis saw probably back in '82, only these may be actually worse depending upon the weapon systems they're using. But someone said to me, and this is now a day old, that 149 casualties had been taken by the Israelis. That may be true, and it may be now that it's up over 200. Have no idea. We know that the Israeli defense minister actually spoke to reporters who were asking about the ostensibly high number of Israeli casualties on the way into Lebanon. And he defended it by saying, no war in our history is as justified as this war that we're fighting now. And high losses are a cost of fighting this just war. Now, the last time the Israelis took something in the neighborhood of 2,000 plus casualties was in 1973 when they fought the Syrians and the Egyptians. I don't know what they're sustaining, but I suspect that if they haven't reached 2,000, they will shortly. Then you've got to also understand that Mr. Netanyahu has treated anyone who is not with him as a potential adversary. I know from some of the reports that I've seen that Russian bases were bombed by the Israeli Air Force in Syria.
In Syria, if you're a missile depot was struck, yes, by the Israelis in Syria.
Yeah, and if you're trying to minimize the numbers of people who are against you, that's not a good way to do business. And so Putin has essentially sent a message to Netanyahu, get out of Lebanon. And the other group that we haven't even mentioned, of course, are the Turks, because 1 million people have already fled Lebanon. And guess where they go? They flee to Turkey. And the Turks already have 3-4 million refugees living in their country as a result of the Syrian war. Now they're going to get more from Lebanon, and the foreign minister said that's unacceptable to us. And I'm getting the impression that the Turks are nearing the point where they're prepared to intervene militarily if the IDF will not end its operations in Lebanon. I see no evidence that the Israelis are going to do anything unless they are compelled to do so by an opponent.
That's on the Lebanon side. We haven't even touched on Iran yet, the other part of this massive question. The Iranians, as I mentioned at the top, now telling the United States, stay out of this, and also that we are removing the restraints. The gloves are off, essentially. They don't want war, they're telling the United States, but the restraints are off, the gloves are off. What will the Israeli response be to Iran? And what do you think the Iranian response will be to Israel at this stage? And where does the United States fit into all of this?
Well, first, let's look at the Israeli position right now. They have not yet responded, which is interesting. I say it's interesting because if the Iranian strike was as light and essentially strategically irrelevant as the Israelis claim, I'm surprised they haven't already launched some sort of retribution strike. Now, I don't have, again, the battle damage assessment. I'm not privileged. I don't get to go in and look at the satellite photography. I'm told that the strike that Iran launched of about 180 missiles, some of which were hypersonic, actually damaged airfields and aircraft. Now, there were some reports about having destroyed or damaged F-35s. I have no way of knowing that. There were also claims that they'd hit F-16s. But the fact that the Israelis haven't responded very quickly, especially with their Air Force, does suggest that the Iranians must have had some impact in that area, because the Israelis are almost entirely dependent on the Air Force. In fact, that's one of the reasons the Iranians have made it very clear they know where the aircraft are and they're going to target them, because without air support, close air support for the Israeli army on the ground, they're probably not going to get very far in Lebanon. And the Israelis know that. Now, what is Iran's response? Iran is simply saying, that's it. We've had it. The Iranians have been listening, as everybody in the Middle East has been listening, to Vladimir Putin and secondarily President Xi. And their counsel has been repeatedly, don't act rashly, exercise restraint. Don't give any reason for someone to go to war against you. And they've listened to this, and they've now concluded that this restraint hasn't worked. I'm sure you must have seen the reports that we, apparently through our representatives on the ground over there, told Hezbollah that we were ready for a negotiated ceasefire with Hezbollah. And that was one of the reasons that meeting was held. And of course, that meeting was identified, found, and targeted by our capabilities. Without our active participation, without our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, our electronic capabilities, the Israelis could not carry off something on the scale that you saw in Beirut recently against Hezbollah. So everybody knows that. I mean, it's not a secret. It may be a secret to the American people that we're that involved, but everybody else in the region knows it, and so does President Putin. And I think they've said now, that's it. We're not going to exercise any more restraint. And we have the capability to deliver punishing strikes. I've seen estimates that at least for 4 or 5 days, Iran could launch 100 missiles an hour against Israel. Now, I don't know if they'll do that, but that's a potential. We also know that the Israelis know, or the Iranians know where the Israelis will go. They are very suspicious of Cyprus. And that's why Erdogan has made comments about Cyprus. Don't try to use it as a launch pad against Hezbollah. If you do that, we'll become involved. We don't want Israeli aircraft in Cyprus. So I think that's one. There's another one, though, and that's Azerbaijan. People don't hear much about Azerbaijan in public, but Azerbaijan has been providing oil to the Israelis through Turkey. And Erdogan has allowed this oil to move without interruption into Israel. That could end very soon because the Turkish population is furious. And once it stopped, and I think the Azeri Turks, whatever their dislikes may be of Iran, are probably equally sensitive to this. But the Azerbaijanis, remember, were supported in their last war with Armenia by the Israelis. The Israelis actually helped the Azeris with unmanned aircraft, in other words, drones, to kill Armenians. That wasn't very popular in Russia. Russia has historically supported the Armenians, but the Armenian government has moved in this sort of globalist direction and made itself something of a puppet of Washington. But the Iranians know that the Israelis, if they want to, have been given license to go into Azerbaijan, where they can set up, they can refuel, and then launch strikes against Iran from Azerbaijan. I don't know what the plans will be, but I suspect that if that's under consideration and the Israelis try to do it, that Azerbaijan will be drawn into the war, unless, of course, Erdogan, who's very close with the Azeri Turks in Azerbaijan, intervenes to stop it. So there's a tinderbox now that is primed to explode. Every conceivable weapon you can imagine, up to nuclear weapons, is available to everybody. And those weapons are going to be used. And Israel is a very small country, and they've concentrated much of their population in the center of the country. The Israelis are going to take terrible losses. And this has always been my concern from the very beginning. And there's been a tendency to treat everyone in the region, Arabs, Turks, Persians, with contempt, as though they're some sort of backwater. There's no human capital. There's no sophistication. There's no technology. Well, that is wrong. And we're going to get an education the hard way very shortly. And I think it's going to be the death knell of Israel. That's how concerned I am. Now, the Israelis, of course, have nuclear weapons. Would they use it? I think there are circumstances under which, yes, they would use it. That should be of great concern to us.
With 10,000 American forces sitting there in that region, if they decide that there's an existential threat to their existence, launching nuclear weapons against Iran, against Syria or other targets, that should be of great concern to the United States. It's a good thing, though, that we've got great leadership in the White House with Kamala Harris, and I feel very good about the leadership that they're going to be able to navigate through this tinderbox right now. Final word, Colonel.
Yeah. Well, in a sane world, the President of the United States would intervene and essentially pull the plug on Kyiv completely. Say, that's it. You've had your shot. This is unacceptable. We're pulling out, which would end the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, frankly. And secondly, he would immediately turn to Netanyahu and say, you've got 48 hours to put together a negotiating strategy to end this conflict. And we'll help you, we'll assist you. But if you fail to do that, if you insist on this course where you're trying to continue the expulsion or killing of the population in Gaza, where you're going to continue harassing, brutalizing the population on the West Bank with the goal of ultimately throwing them out, if you're going to continue with this invasion in Lebanon with the goal of destroying not just Hezbollah, but bringing Lebanon as a country to heal or leave it in ruins, if you are going to continue to strike targets in Syria, Iraq, and then ultimately Iran, then we will leave you and you will be on your own. But you see, that would be a president who had a clear, unambiguous picture of our true national interests. We have no interest in a war with Russia. We have no national interest in a war with Iran, or for that matter, anybody else in the Middle East. We should be interested in the opposite. But both Zelensky and Netanyahu are interested in dragging us into their conflicts. It needs to stop.
You want more of that, and you can read the message and the mission over at Our Country, Our Choice. Go to ourcountryourchoice.com. The Colonel is the CEO of ourcountryourchoice.com, and watch his mission video over there, Operation Focus, focusing on America, putting America's security first. It's high time people pay attention to that. Colonel, great to see you as always. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Clayton. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Colonel. Yeah, and a lot of people in our chat now just saying America first. Like, if you're American, you should care about your own country, and we should not be shipping billions overseas right now. And it's remarkable, the numbers over the past few days, when you look at the amount of money we've been sending to Ukraine, to Israel, all across the world, and the people of North Carolina and the people affected by Hurricane Helene getting a $750 check right now.
And then when you juxtapose that with the $10,000 debit cards that illegal migrants in New York City got, which we covered extensively on this show, it's outrageous that now if you go to FEMA's website, you can apply for $750 later based on proving your needs. It is available to non-citizens.
My
so
house
you'll get
is
it
gone.
later.
Everything
but
is
migrants
gone.
with no fraud check, no ID check, nothing, get a $10,000 migrant card like that.
Yeah.
So
if you're illegal
we know
in the
you
U.S.,
don't have
you're-
power, Well, you probably lost your computer or your laptop. You don't have cell service. So yeah, just find a way to get online and go apply for that.
Apply for your $750.
Right, the voucher.
Yeah.
That comes later. Well, actually, that makes a good... Please, Philip, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, what kind of blows my mind is how, like, the putting your country first seems to be like a controversial thing. Where, like, what the hell is the government there to do anyway? Like, it's not like we as a citizenship or as a citizenry are like, you know what, we want the people that are going to be strongest for other countries. Like, we're really voting to make our own lives better. Like, start there. Don't end there.
That should be the first thing, right? Our government is there to serve us, the United States citizens. The Irish government should be serving the Irish people, right? That's how it works.
Because the Irish people are working to pay taxes in order for a social contract in order to build an infrastructure around them. That's why they have the country of Ireland. That's why we have the country of the United States. The social contract is we work, you can take some of our money in order to build us a good infrastructure to live. That's the deal. We're not getting the second part of that. We are working, we are paying our taxes. We're not getting the security or the infrastructure that we hope for. And in fact, that makes a great segue into the segment we're about to do, because the Department of Homeland Security says it cannot stop migrants with terrorism ties from illegally entering the United States. So this report that they just released, called the Homeland Threat Assessment, is basically a compendium of all the problems that they see with no plans to change it. It's just, here's why you should be afraid. We're telling you what to look out for, but we can't stop it, basically. So let's take a look at what they're saying, because the report, called 2025 Homeland Threat Assessment, basically says, regarding the bad guys and the bad drugs, we don't got this. Here's what they warn about. They says they're particularly concerned about a confluence of factors, including violent extremists' responses to domestic socio-political developments, especially because of the election, international events that domestic and foreign violent extremists will use to justify attacks on the homeland, lone offenders, small groups posing a threat. Meanwhile, foreign terrorists and their supporters will maintain their enduring intent on the homeland, plus trafficking, sale of drugs, transnational domestic criminal actors, fentanyl. I mean, this is just, it's a laundry list of what we've been covering on this show. The Department of Homeland Security says, yes, Redacted, you're right. All that stuff is happening. But who does it say is even though that's happening, specifically through our southern borders, human trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, terrorists entering. But who do they say are the big three we need to be worried about? Any guesses? Who are the big three actors?
China, Iran, and Russia.
You got it.
That's a shock.
Yes, this should have been a Family Feud question. Take a look at what they say. The People's Republic of China, Russia, and Iran will remain the most pressing foreign threats to our critical infrastructure, even though the southern border has drugs and sex slaves pouring across it. Russia, China, Iran, they don't really... I mean, what's the last American town you saw inundated with Russian extremists?
Anywhere?
Springfield,
Springfield, Ohio. Yeah.
I'm missing this cultural reference.
Red Dawn, amazing 1980s movie. Wolverines, where the Russians invade the United States, and we need a wily group of teenagers to stop the Russians from invading.
Okay. And the Iranian immigrants overflowing in certain towns. Is that happening? Who has Iranian sex slaves on their bingo card? Is that happening? Anybody? No?
No, I don't have any of that.
So in my experience and my news reporting, I have not seen that as a major threat to the U.S. homeland, but that's what they say. Even though they say that Russia and Iran and China are somehow involved in the drug trade, take a look at this paragraph and see if you can make any sense. Despite the lethal and destabilizing threats terrorism poses to our country, the production, trafficking, and sale of illegal drugs by transnational and domestic criminal actors is the most lethal and persistent threats to U.S. communities. Concurrently, adversarial states are intent on sowing distrust in our institutions, as well as confusion and division through their malign influence campaigns, which seek to boost these efforts through the 2024 election cycle. So, drug trafficking, bad, biggest problem, but also just keep your eye out, because we want you to be afraid of Russia, China, and Iran. Can anyone make sense of that?
Well, it's a huge leap because it would be like if you looked at like the mafia and you said that Sicily was a major influence on the U.S. and it's like you're talking about criminals. So criminal organizations, they may be a Russian criminal organization, they may be a Chinese criminal organization.
Sure,
it's not like they're directly working for the government of that country. That's a huge leap there from one to the other.
Right, but it also does not connect China, Iran, and Russia to drug trafficking. It says drugs and the crime through the southern border is the biggest problem, but also, and it's just like an addendum, but also Russia, China, Iran.
Well, they could argue about Russian vodka, but they banned that from coming in through sanctions. So I guess
that's right. That's right. And in fact, they never prove that those countries have much to do with our drug trade, except that China actually, they later say, has changed some of their laws so that some of their drugs that are exported are better labeled so that they cannot end up in the fentanyl crisis. So China seems to have a handle on this a little bit, or at least a plan. This document is full of no plans at all. It's just a boo document, what to be scared of.
Gail says, Redacted is really blind to evil in other countries, huh? No, not at all. What we're saying is that you leave the southern border wide open and now you're pointing the fingers at other countries. Like our southern border is wide open.
Right.
Like we're pointing the finger at us. Close the southern border. There's a lot of other evil in the world. There's plenty. We don't need more evil in the United States coming from these other countries that we've helped destabilize.
Also, I would like you to prove it. Then let me see some proof, right? Because I've read books about the 8 years of sanctioning Iran during the Obama administration where they never quite proved the Iranian nuclear power. Nuclear weapons. They never proved it. And I am waiting. I don't want to go to a war based on lies. Am I saying Iran is the best place on earth? I don't know. I've never been to Iran, but I'm not going to be sold lies to go to war. If you want to, go ahead and swallow that bitter pill. Take it with some orange juice. Okay.
Well, then
but go ahead.
Sorry, really quick. The everything that's in that document that you said are things that are happening because of the migrant crisis, but it's like kind of coincidental that they're now saying that it's Iran, Russia, and all these other places. They can say if something happens because of the migrants, they can be like, well, they were Russians or they were Iranians or whatever, and people will just buy it.
But that's total crap because the document clearly states they know who is doing the drug trafficking. Take a look. It's the Sinaloa cartel and the New Generation Jalisco Hotel, two large Mexico-based criminal drug gangs out of Mexico. But China, just remember, we hate China. So they say drug seizures are down, but only this year, not down since the Biden-Harris administration took office. We showed you these numbers yesterday when Tim Walz at the debate said that border crossings are down. You can sort of say that because in the year 2024, the general trajectory is down, but they're trending down. This year alone, they are not down during the administration. In fact, let's take a look at meth seizures at the border. Meth alone, we're only concentrating on that sort of darker green line that's trending above the rest. So what they're saying is that drug seizures are down only slightly since 2021, but up since 2023. Also notice that meth seizures alone since 2020 have exceeded 150,000 pounds per year. Okay, keep that number in your mind. It's always, in every year of the Biden-Harris administration, over 150,000 pounds. Well, let's look at the meth seizures from the Trump-Obama years. It never even exceeded 100,000 pounds. So never was it this high until the Biden administration took office. Now, you could read this chart and say, well, these are seizures. That means that the Biden-Harris administration is seizing more drugs. Maybe they're more on it than Obama and Trump are. I don't know because we don't know the ratio of what's seized versus what gets through. So if that ratio is constant, then we're to assume that more drugs are in our country. We don't have an answer for that. We need more context clearly before we jump to any conclusions. Okay, on to terrorists. The document correctly states that Muslim extremists want to strike inside the United States. That is true, but if we listen to why they want to hit us so badly, it's because we kill civilians in their countries with constant droning, and we support Israel's brutality on the Palestinians. That's what they tell us. In fact, Osama bin Laden and the Orlando nightclub pulse shooter tried to tell us this, but we don't listen. We just think, oh, that's Muslim extremism. We don't need to hear that, right? What if we just said, oh, because we attack them constantly, that's why they want to attack us? Maybe we should stop that and then stop the retaliation that we bring upon ourselves. We never stop to listen. We just think they're crazy. We don't hear their pleas to stop bombing their kids. Carry on. They also report that China, Russia, and Iran are going to step up their use of AI on us. No proof. They just say they're going to do it. Here's what they literally say. Under this document, you should look for yourself. They say Russia is likely to do this, and Iran almost certainly will do it too. That's what we get for proof. That the DHS is saying likely and they're almost certain that this is going to happen. Okay. What about human trafficking at the southern border? Basically, DHS says, yeah, that's a thing. So they give it a 1-page summary. It happens. Forced sex labor crossing at our southern border. It's happening. Social media helps it happen. Forced labor. They don't say how they're going to deal with it. They don't say who's doing it. They don't say it's an increased problem, which it is. It's just, yeah, that's a threat to homeland security. And social media
is the biggest problem.
Right.
Social media is the biggest problem.
Sure.
Right. Okay. So Twitter is the biggest problem, I'm sure. So let's go after Elon Musk and take down Twitter. Not our facilitation by the Catholic Charities, by HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration and Aid Society, the Department of Homeland Security under Alejandro Mayorkas, under the Biden administration. But social media is the biggest problem with human trafficking in the United States.
And forced labor and all this stuff. Yeah, it happens. It's just saying, yep, continues to happen. Right. That's the thing. And we don't have a plan to stop it. We are not tracking it. We don't know who's doing it. We're not really all that concerned, but it's a thing. Right. So this document reads more like a war document than an actual document of what they're trying to solve at all. They're just warning you of, it reads to me, this is a bingo card of all the things they will use to sell you the war next, because they're not clearly trying to stop any of this. They're just telling you what to be afraid of so that you can just, it's a trampoline. It's a layup. Like, who are we going to sell you a war for? Here, come jump here. Come jump here. Oh, human trafficking. Got it. Iran, AI from Russia. And you'll borrow this. You'll buy it if you read between the lines and support a foreign war, I suppose. But it's not surprising given that we keep watching them not solve problems as they escalate. So read the document for yourself. Let me know what you think. Are you going to buy this and march right on into a war? Or are you going to demand that someone actually stop these things? What do you want? Just let me know.
Bobby Taylor in our chat says Redacted is killing it today with the truth. Thank you guys. Well, hey, look, there's a lot of propaganda. Swear to God, it's really sickening right now. If you flip on like the major networks, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, it is just a massive, massive pile of propaganda right now. It's really, really disturbing. And, look, alternative media is under attack. So thank you guys for supporting what we do here. And we don't have all the answers, but we try to see through all of the jokes and the propaganda that they're throwing at us right now. And it's really disturbing. 33 days until the election. So thank you guys. Hey, we got more news to come here on the show. We're going to talk about two angles on this Trump story. So overnight, President Trump warned that Jack Smith was about to drop an October surprise. Basically, he's the unconstitutional special counsel, right? He's been found to be unconstitutional. How does he still have power? We don't know. But anyway, a massive bombshell on the Trump campaign front from that side, and also the assassination attempt on President Trump. The trial has now been delayed indefinitely because they have just discovered a treasure trove of new evidence around this guy who tried to assassinate Trump. What is it exactly? Are there deep state connections to the CIA? Were there other people involved? We're going to talk about that in just moments. But first, China just rolled out a massive new stimulus package, massive, and it's going to be another piece of the death knell for the United States dollar. And coming up in about 2 weeks' time, Russia is going to be holding the massive BRICS conference where you have Iran, you have the UAE, you have Egypt, you have Brazil, you have China, all coming to town in order to lay out their plans for the new BRICS currency. This is the one. This is the moment in October here, October 22nd, I believe, in Russia, when they are going to roll out and fully announce this BRICS currency, which is going to be a strategic advantage to them to say goodbye to the U.S. dollar. That is why, I don't know if you've noticed gold prices and silver prices surging. That is because the demand for gold and silver is off the charts, and the demand for the U.S. dollar is plummeting. And that is why you're seeing this mass migration now into precious metals. We are big believers in precious metals, investing in precious metals. If you've got money sitting in an IRA or a 401k and you're thinking about how do I protect my family right now, one way you can do it as a hedge against inflation and a hedge against the U.S. dollar is to roll some of that over into precious metals, gold and silver. You can have it stored in your house, or you could have it stored off-site in a storage facility that's protected 24/7. It's totally up to you. And our friends at Lear Capital can help you do that. They've been helping us for years. They're a fantastic company. They're an American company. If you get on the phone with them and talk to them, you're not going to get some call center in India. You're going to talk to Americans who can walk you through the process of buying bullion and have it shipped right to your house, or again, stored off-site. If you've got an old IRA sitting around or an old 401k from an old job, you can actually convert that into a gold IRA or a silver IRA that's self-directed. Allows you to invest in anything. You can buy real estate. You could buy stocks if you want. You can buy gold, silver, anything inside of that self-directed IRA. And Wall Street doesn't have control over it. You have control over it. And I think the custodian they work with is Equity Trust, which is the custodian that we work with our IRA. They've been around for years. So great custodian, Equity Trust, that handles the IRA process. Anyway, get on the phone with them, call them, just have a conversation with them. 1-800-613-3557, or go to the website learredacted.com. Get your free guide right now. Protect your family. Make sure at least some of your retirement savings is not in U.S. dollars and you're protecting it inside of precious metals or tangible real assets like real estate, gold, and silver, things that have been around for 5,000 years that have survived wars, destructions of governments, famines, destructions of currencies, all of it. So check them out. 1-800-613-3557 or go to learredacted.com. Well, get this. The trial of the man that tried to assassinate President Trump just got an indefinite delay. Why? Well, prosecutors say they've uncovered a mountain, a trove of new evidence, a treasure trove of new evidence. They say makes this case, quote, quite complex. I've never heard this before. And overnight also, U.S. District Court for the D.C. for Washington, D.C. unsealed Jack Smith's 165-page filing against President Trump. President Trump overnight called this election interference. How dare you do this? Just 33 days until an election. So two big decisions by two judges that are raising a lot of eyebrows today. So we thought we'd ask our friend Judge Andrew Napolitano, host of Judging Freedom, all about this. There's no one I would rather ask about this. Judge, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for the kind introduction. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Always great to see you. First, I guess let's start with the assassin. And this, to me, seemed like a stunning revelation from prosecutors that they've uncovered not just a little bit of evidence, but a treasure trove of evidence. And now they say it makes it too complex to move forward with a trial. Why would a judge allow that to happen? Can you walk me through that decision?
Sure. We start with the Constitution that guarantees a speedy trial. Then we proceed to a federal statute that says the trial must, if the defendant demands it, must take place within 90 days of indictment. He's already been indicted, so the clock is ticking. I don't know what the judge will do if the defense says we're ready and the government says it's not, because it is almost always the other way around. The government is ready and the defendant is not. I suspect that the defense uncovered evidence in two areas. We don't know exactly what it is, but this is just a suspicion on the basis of my experience with these things. One is prior bad acts. In the federal system, the government can tell the jury prior bad behavior, uncharged behavior of the defendant that shows a pattern consistent with what the government claims the defendant did in this case. So they probably have discovered either plotting or planning leading up to this case or other attempts by him to influence public policy by means of violence. Second area that I suspect they're delving into is in anticipation of an insanity defense. There's no real defense here to what he did. He was caught red-handed. There's no question but that he is the person that was there on the golf course. He did point the weapon out of the bushes. He did not pull the trigger. He was fired at. He ran away and they caught him. There's no question but that it's him. So his defense lawyers will say the only defense is insanity. If they use the insanity defense, the defendant does not have to prove that he's insane. Rather, the government must prove that he is sane. And in order to do that, they have to address a treasure trove of behavior on his part implicating his sanity. So in preparation for that insanity defense, they have gathered more than they expected to, and it'll take them more than 90 days to sift through it and prepare their witnesses. Will the trial judge give them more time? This is another interesting quirk. Who is the trial judge? Aileen Cannon. Does that name ring a bell? She's also the trial judge in the Mar-a-Lago documents case in which Donald Trump is the defendant. Can a judge hear two cases, one where a human being is the defendant and another where the same human being is a victim? Answer, no. She will need to remove herself from one of the two cases. So
wow.
this
Which one do you think she'll remove herself?
And curiouser, Clayton.
What would you do, Judge? What would you do? Which one would you pick to remove yourself from?
Well, I would prefer to try the documents case, but I don't think she should try it because she's so newly appointed and so inexperienced that it's been reversed so many times because of that inexperience by the Circuit Court of Appeals. But if it were I, with the experience that I had, I would want the Mar-a-Lago case. Any judge would. I don't think the Ruth case is going to go to trial. I think he'll be persuaded to plead guilty because even if he's found, another crazy quirk, Clayton, even if he's found not guilty by reason of insanity because he's insane, this is the John Hinckley case, who was found not guilty by reason of insanity when he tried to assassinate President Reagan. He will spend the rest of his life in a federal mental institution, or as much of his life in there as federal physicians think he should spend. Hinckley's a free man today because his lawyers and federal psychiatrists concluded he no longer suffered from whatever he was suffering from at the time he tried to kill Reagan. So Ruth is a lot older. His chances of ever being freed again are very slim, and his chances of acquittal are none and none.
One thing that came to mind, there's been a lot of suggestions about this assassin that he had connections, deep state connections. You're not in Ukraine without some sort of awareness by the CIA. You don't travel from, he published videos talking about how he's broke and that he's flying first class from Hawaii to Mar-a-Lago with flights that are, over $10,000 in flights. He had all sorts of equipment and different accessories. Did he act alone? So my mind went immediately when I saw that the prosecutors had uncovered a treasure trove of new evidence that there might be other individuals involved in this. Is that a possibility as well?
If it is under the entire controversy doctrine, which means one controversy needs to be resolved at one time and in one place, they would need to investigate these other individuals, and if they participated in criminal activity, indict them. If they did not, if they were unwitting dupes, then they're witnesses against him. So either way, it's going to take some time to develop the evidence and decide whether or not it's criminal, and if there's enough criminal evidence there of crimes, if they can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They're not supposed to just indict willy-nilly. I say not supposed to. They do it all the time. They're only supposed to indict when they honestly and objectively believe they have enough evidence to convict.
The other big story overnight is U.S. District Court in D.C. has unsealed Jack Smith's 165-page filing against Trump. Trump then last night called this election interference. And Trump warned about this yesterday. He said this was coming, that Jack Smith was going to get in the way of the election once again. What I love about you is you're always able to cut through the politics and the propaganda. So obviously we have to take what Trump says with a grain of salt. But is this election interference? I mean, on its face, that's what President Trump is alleging by unsealing this court filing. What do you make of this? And what does this court filing tell us?
The court filing, in my view, is very damaging to the former president. It's basically a roadmap of the government's case. If this case goes to trial, I say if, that would presume that Kamala Harris is elected president. If this case goes to trial, we now know what the government's opening statement will be. And the evidence of the former president's personal, private behavior, not core to the Constitution, not arguably official, but personal, private. What am I doing by putting my fingers up? The Supreme Court in the immunity case put all presidential power to three categories. Core, that which is specifically articulated in the Constitution, be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, nominate judges and ambassadors. Official, that which statutes authorize him to do, which is core is absolutely immune. Official is presumed to be immune. And then private, personal, what he's doing for his own interest, that is not immune. So this roadmap delves into that third area, arguing that what he did on January 6th was personal, private, and not immune. So all of the interactions on January 6th that are cataloged in this 165-page document filed earlier this week are with private individuals, not with any officials in the government. And it all shows the government's theory about how Donald Trump began the day after Election Day to put together various plans and plots to interfere with the ability of the Electoral College to declare Joe Biden as the winner. Now, when Trump learned of this, he made a very interesting statement. Said, I didn't do anything wrong. They did. What did he mean by they did? He meant that the government was violating its own internal regulation about electioneering. That regulation is not a law. It's just a policy. And it says the government will not indict someone whose name is on the ballot within 60 days of Election Day. Of course, they indicted him long before 60 days before Election Day, but they did release all of their evidence. The government will say, we didn't release it, the court did. We filed it under seal because the court asked us to. The federal judge, decided to release it. Is it fair to release it? Probably not. It will become a campaign issue. Is the evidence harmful to the president? I think it's devastating.
You think it's devastating? What makes you say devastating?
Because the witnesses against him are the people in whom he confided that day. Though their names are redacted from this, we pretty much know who they are. And they testified before the first grand jury that indicted them the first time before the immunity decision. And then they testified before the second grand jury, where the prosecutors only asked about personal, private, not about core and not about official.
Does this affect the election?
You know, that's a political judgment that I usually don't make. Probably not. I think Trump's base couldn't care less what the Justice Department thinks about him. And I think Vice President Harris's base also already has such an antipathy towards Trump that they don't care what the Justice Department thinks about him.
Right. Right. We saw new numbers out just over the past 24 hours showing that basically none of this has stuck to Trump. And the polls show that they don't care any of these motions that keep coming after him. So we will see. Judge, always great to see you. I want all of our audience, go check out, the Judge has an amazing YouTube channel. It's called Judging Freedom. If you're watching us on Rumble, it's on Rumble as well. But Judging Freedom, our friend Judge Andrew Napolitano, he's got great guests, great insight, and always great to see him. Judge, thank you so much for joining us.
It's
we
like
appreciate
the old
it.
days having these chats with you. Thank you, Clayton.
I know,
All
I
the
love
best.
it.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Judge. Yeah, that's great. Love going to lunch with the Judge, and he's such a great guy. Such a great guy.
I'm still so confused on how a federal judge has ruled that the special counsel of Jack Smith violates the appointments clause, and that guy can still keep going. I don't understand.
Because don't you need Congress to come in and step in and say, okay, this is now a violation, and we're gonna end this special counsel clause.
Right.
So you basically need an act of Congress that's controlled by Democrats.
Yes. And now, look, I read Andrew Weisson's book about the Trump special counsel of Robert Mueller. And one of the things they really had a problem with was that James Comey decided to investigate Hillary Clinton as the October surprise. He announced that in October, just weeks before we went to the ballot. And they believe that hindered the Hillary Clinton camp. But now, looking in hindsight, I think we are supposed to conclude that it didn't actually hurt her any more than her own campaign had already hurt herself. So, this idea of releasing things just before the election, maybe it's that the American voter is just getting so tired of it and can see all of this as political maneuvering. I mean, who knows, right?
Sergeant T in our chat says the Judge is wrong. The President of the United States has every obligation to make sure elections are free and fair. Maybe, but he's part of the executive branch. I don't know exactly how that's his obligation, right? I mean, under the Secretary of State's office is his obligation.
When Texas AG Ken Paxton was under investigation and pulled from his office, one of the things that he was complaining about is that the federal government had removed states' rights to investigate election fraud. And so we know that it exists with the state. We know that the federal government has messed with that. And so we know that Texas is one of the states that has continuously sued the federal government to make it stop. So what does the president have in order to remove those hamperings on states? It's a complicated question.
Yeah.
It's maybe not for journalists, it's for lawyers.
The president may have like a moral or ethical obligation to do so, but when you're talking about the legal obligation, who does that fall on? And that falls on Congress, doesn't it? For elections integrity, or is that the executive?
Election integrity. I mean, that's a great question. It falls, in the states, it falls to the Secretary of State's office in all of the states in the Union. So election integrity under the Secretary of State of the United States, it doesn't fall. It falls to the states to ensure this security of their election in every state. So like when I was in Montana covering the governor of Montana, Mark Roscoe at the time, covering the Secretary of State's office, the Secretary of State is the office that ensures election integrity across all 50 states in the United States. Of course, and then they have to certify those elections, and then that goes to the federal level where those electors then go to Washington, D.C. and certify what the states have done. So it doesn't fall to the federal government to stand up and say what the states have done.
But what Ken Paxton says is under the Biden-Harris administration, they have been passed down federal laws that prevents them from looking into election irregularity when they see it. In Texas, he's not allowed. He's been kneecapped by federal regulation. So who put that there? Could President Trump remove it and, in fact, instate election integrity? Those are questions that we should have answers to before we go to the ballot, don't you think?
Yeah, and definitely. Well, more news to get to here. But first, I want to call out, usually people call out your outfits on the show. But I got to call this one out here. Miss Stacy Lynn says, love Clayton's blue plaid shirt.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Dressing like it's fall.
It's one of those untuck it shirts. You ever see that place, Untuck It?
Yes, I know.
Like it's the shirts that you don't tuck in. It's untucked.
I see that. I see for myself.
Is the 10 seconds focused on my shirt too much for you to handle?
Clayton came down in that shirt today, and I'm like, oh, you're not wearing your black shirt and khakis like you work at Target today.
Yeah.
He's dressing up for the show.
I've never seen, don't they wear like red shirts with like a bullseye on them at Target?
I don't. Yeah, it's red.
I figured it's fall. It's
like,
getting cold now. It's getting cold, so gotta put on the fall.
Now you're
fall
dressing like a Blockbuster.
That's right. Stop picking on me.
Just kidding. No, I really like the shirt. I'm glad to see some style.
Backhanded compliments. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for subscribing. We do have more news to get to. Well, there's been a lot of elections in Europe, and it looks like Emmanuel Macron just a few minutes ago said the EU could die. The European Union could die. What is he so scared about in the European Union? Is that because far right candidates are starting to show signs of life? We'll talk about that.
And what do they mean by far right? But first, we want to remind you that we have a newsletter you can subscribe to. You can find it at redacted.inc. It is totally free. There's no level of the newsletter that is a paid version and one that's a free version. It's free across the board. Free means free, and I mean it. So you can enjoy it in the morning with a cup of coffee or over your lunch, whatever time of day you decide to read it. We cover the same topics that we're going to cover in the show in the newsletter, and we try to link you to original sources so that you can study these things for yourself. And it's a great way to get those resources. It bugs the shit out of me when I read a story, let's say on CNN, about the Trump indictment, and they don't link you to it. They could link to the original document so you could read it yourself. I try really hard to make sure that you have those access to those original sources in this newsletter. Also, it has some kind of funner things you might want to know that go viral, that kind of thing. So subscribe to the newsletter. It's totally free. You can read it at redacted.inc. One more time, that's redacted.inc. Well, once again, the media calls the winning party in an election in Europe far right. The Freedom Party won the vote over the weekend, but opposition is refusing to allow them to form a government because they're far right, they say. We can't work with the far right. This is the will of the people being subverted in a Western country. So joining us from Austria is political analyst Ralf Scholheimer, host of Hammer Time on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. Finally, we talk about Austria, right? Finally, we can actually talk about my country. It's been long, but it's finally happening.
But maybe not in a great way, because tell us what happened. This Freedom Party had a record turnout. They're being called anti-immigrant, of course, far right. But what do they really stand for, and why can they not form the government that the people are voting for them to have?
Well, in order to tell the story, I have to go back 32 years, because my theory is, and I hope that I will not upset your viewers by saying so, I think that modern right-wing populism actually did start in Austria in the early 1990s. Right? The Freedom Party, the rise of the Freedom Party began in the early 1990s, and one of the key elements of their popularity at the time was they made a referendum in 1992. And the name of that referendum was Österreich zuerst, which is German for Austria first. So I'm not saying that Donald Trump stole it with his America first agenda, but the idea that Western governments put everybody else first, except their own people, right? That they act in everybody else's interests, except the interest of their own people. I think this sentiment crystallized into a successful political movement for the first time in the 1990s in Austria. And if we look at what they said in that referendum, I mean, it's quite fascinating, right? They said there is too much migration, which is what we say now. They said there is not enough money for law enforcement and police, which is precisely what we say now. They said that the education system is failing young people, which is exactly what we say now, right? It says that, that there are that there is too much obedience to institutions and organizations that are not accountable to the people, which is exactly what we are saying now. So I think in many ways, they were really ahead of their time. They had some up and downs as a party. They were in government before, then they imploded, then they were in government again, then they imploded again. But this is the first time and this is so interesting, right? Because it shows you, even if you stumble again and again as a party, if you get the issues right, you can always make a comeback. So they were going up and down, but this time I think they really got everything right. They ran a very disciplined campaign. They got the entire COVID issue right, which I think is ultimately what pushed them over the finishing line. And they got the migration issue right. So I think I'm not hiding my sympathies for the party. I think they did lots of things right. And the Austrians in particular, you can no longer blackmail us into not voting for a party with the far-right moniker, because that has been done 30 years ago. It's stale, it's old, nobody cares about it anymore.
So is it as prevalent in your media as it is in ours? Because we can just call you those names, okay, and people just are losing trust in the media. That's a familiar story.
Well, let's put it this way. If there is what is a popular term now that I think is entirely wrong, if there is a so-called uniparty system where you have maybe one populist opposition party, but all the other parties are more or less the same. That's true in individual countries, but I think when it comes to the media, we have a unimedia system that operates globally. I mean, you cannot distinguish the headlines from Politico in Europe, from the New York Times, from the Austrian daily newspapers, from most of the British newspapers. It's the same article all over. Sometimes it is like they have a prefabricated article, and then they just switch the names. It is far right, and then the name of an Austrian politician, or Donald Trump, or Giorgia Meloni, and then it's exactly the same article. Because there is no longer an actual engagement with the positions. It is just, these people are far right, therefore I don't even have to talk about the positions they stand for. We saw the same in Germany with the AfD, right? The AfD is far right, therefore they are bad, therefore it doesn't even matter what they demand on the policy side, which again, the voters are much smarter than that. What I really like about these developments is they show that the people are so much smarter than the media and those in power often think. And I find this very, very encouraging.
Okay, but the center, what they're calling the center left, or this, well, let's ditch these labels. The Social Democrats and the People's Party are refusing to work with them and allow them to form a government. So what power will they have if they are not allowed to form a government, which the people have voted for?
Well, that's a good question. And the problem is, yes, right, this time probably they will not make it into government. That is correct. But I think whichever alternative government is being formed will not have a very long shelf life. So to be quite honest, this might be a good thing, because they are usually very good as an opposition party. They came in first with about almost 3 percentage points ahead of the Conservative Party. If they have to go in opposition again, I would argue that the next time they will not have 29%, they will have 34%. And then they can govern even more effectively. So if the other parties, because this is the big irony here, I don't know what the expectation of the other parties is. People voted for the Freedom Party because they're dissatisfied with the performance of the other parties. Now, the other parties, they don't offer a program. They only offer, we are not the Freedom Party. We are not the FPÖ. But that's not enough, right? This is not going to convince anybody. By the way, this is the same. The reason why we know that this is not working, we see this in Germany, right? If all you have is, we are not the AfD, that's not weakening the AfD, it's strengthening the AfD, because contrary to the media and the politicians, people actually look or listen to the program. And just as with the AfD in Germany, or with Nigel Farage in the UK, or the Freedom Party in Austria, they look at the program, or the parts of the program that they promise that they will execute, and say, we like what we see. So they want to see that executed. And if those in power are not doing it, well, then more and more voters will switch to that party.
So they're voting, though, for better living conditions for Austrians. I think most people may not realize Austrians have some of the highest tax rates in the Western world. So what specifically do you think people are going to? Is it very much like what we are going to vote for in November? We want safe borders. We want law enforcement. We want good infrastructure. When you land in America, you might notice that there's a big sign that says Joe Biden gave you this new water fountain in the Philadelphia airport. And then what else, right? And you're like, great, that's what I got out of this infrastructure bill. So what specifically do you think Austrians want that we may relate to in the United States?
Well, What's really interesting is I looked at the demographics of the people who voted for the Freedom Party. They are almost exactly the same demographics like the people who vote for the AfD in Germany. And what are those demographics? It's people under the age of 30. So it's those who have the most of their life still ahead of them. So for them, life is not in the rear mirror. Life for them is through the front window. So they have to live with the consequences of failed policies for the longest. It's the working class, right? It's people in a job, in working class jobs. It's people who are self-employed. So it's those who are the future of the country and those who keep the country going. Now, who voted for the quote-unquote establishment parties? It's mostly people over 60. It's the pensioners. It's the people, and no disrespect to the pensioners. They did their share. Don't get me wrong, but it's mostly people who are shielded from the failed policies of the past. They have their fixed pension, they have their income, which just like in the United States with Social Security, nobody's going to touch it until the system collapses, of course. But nobody believes, even though it will, that the collapse is imminent. And it's people that, let's be frank here, they're on a clock in a way. And again, I mean no disrespect, but for them, the mass migration issue, for example, or what's happening in schools, unless of course they have grandchildren and so, but we have the same horrible demographic profile like everybody else in Europe. So for them, it doesn't really, if you're 60, 75 and you live in a nice apartment in a nice district of Vienna, it doesn't really matter to you whether schools are crumbling in working class districts. But what it shows you is that the future is right wing, because it's those who are young, it's those who are working, it's those who are paying taxes, who shift more and more to the right. And that's, as I said, that's happening in Germany, it's happening in Austria, and I believe, to be honest, I think it's also happening, if we believe certain polls among union members, for example, I think it's also happening in the United States. I think this is the problem with, if you allow me to switch gears real quickly, the problem with Donald Trump has been that Donald Trump, I think, pursued very good policies, but he was very bad in articulating them. What we saw yesterday with J.D. Vance was, this is what Trump's policies look like if somebody talks about them in an eloquent, articulated way. And actually, they very much resemble the program and the ideas of the quote-unquote far-right parties in Europe, right? Protect the borders, create conditions where young people have a future, where they can afford a family, where they can afford housing, and where those who want to see a future for themselves and for the country have the conditions that they can fulfill the highest potential. So this is not just an Austrian phenomenon. I think this is a phenomenon across the West. The Europeans, I think, had one advantage that. And this is just coincidence. This is not trying to be a cheap shot at the Americans, because I love the Americans. I love America. But that the United States, their right wing, or I just use the term far right because everybody uses it, but I don't mean it in a negative sense. It found an imperfect vessel in Donald Trump. And of course, Donald Trump also had the hardest fight, because in Europe, you just get new parties, the AfD, right? Nigel Farage, you get just new parties because our systems allow it. In the United States, founding a new party is a suicidal attempt. So Donald Trump had to take over an established party and reshape it into this populist right-wing working class party. But I think he has accomplished it. Now he needs somebody who can articulate it. And that makes the J.D. Vance Trump tickets, or the Trump Vance tickets, so interesting. I have to admit, after yesterday's debate, my dream would be kind of a right-wing coalition from Italy to Austria to Germany to Hungary to France to the UK, including the United States. I think this could really be a Western civilization-saving coalition. So I plead with your viewers, your American viewers, that go and early vote and go on November 5th, and every vote, even if you live in California, every vote counts.
Yes. Yeah. I guess what I worry about is that we saw in 2016 there was a vote for Brexit, and that same sentiment ended up in a Trump win in 2016. So we saw this sort of wave of a similar sentiment, and we had a template in the United States. We were sort of warned when Brexit passed. And so now we see a similar thing. We see a lot of right, I don't want to use wing anymore. I'm going to say right-leaning voters sweeping throughout Europe. We think that will happen in the United States, but we're being given a template in Europe for the leftist party to say, I don't accept this. I don't allow you to govern. I'm not. We dig our heels and we're going to just throw a big fat temper tantrum. And
Yes.
so is this the temper tantrum that we may see after a Trump win? Is that something that you see is a possibility?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Brexit is a beautiful example. So you had David Cameron came in. I was almost calling him James Cameron, but of course it's David. David Cameron came in. Like, they did the referendum, and to everybody's surprise, the British people voted to leave the EU. But the issue then was that the people that were supposed to make Brexit happen were people who didn't want Brexit to happen, and this is exactly how Brexit was executed. And this is where whether you want to call it the entrenched institutions, whether you want to call it the deep state, but this is the big problem. Very often, and I said this on your show before, right? The problem is, even if the right wins elections, winning an election gets you into office, but it is controlling the institutions that gets you into power. And this, I think, was also what hampered Donald Trump in his first term, that Trump was always not just fighting against the Democrats, he was always also fighting against the institutions, in the sense that, for example, a good one is, let's say, the State Department. They basically wanted to do whatever they wanted without any reference to the president. And he also had to fight the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnells, both of whom didn't like Trump because they were, old guard institutional country club Republicans. They were, and to this, I mean Mitch McConnell, if he doesn't freeze up in front of a camera, was capable of adapting to this a little bit. But I think people like Paul Ryan, to the very end, did not understand that the Republican Party, if they want to survive, as they did under Trump, is the party of a multi-ethnic, working class, patriot coalition, just as it is for the right in Europe. But the problem is, and this was the mistake by everybody on the right to some extent, that we neglected the institutions from the bureaucracy to the universities, and it's the universities where the people are educated that then move into the bureaucracy. If all of these people are left-wing, it's great to have a right-wing chancellor, a right-wing president, but to say it in a somewhat provocative way, he has a hard time getting someone, carrying a letter from his office to the post box. And I think this is also, of course, remember with Donald Trump, there were all these leaks and all these stories. And it was very difficult for him to govern because you had all these people that actively tried to sabotage his presidency, even though they were in no position to do so. So in many cases, I know this conversation is not supposed to be about the United States, but there were many cases where, the executive branch, of which the president is the head, was not taken as serious as it was supposed to be, because the institution. There was this great op-ed by an anonymous source in the New York Times about how great the deep state was in resisting Donald Trump. Where they say, you guys are bureaucrats, you're civil servants. You're not supposed to be the resistance. You do whatever the president tells you because that is your job. And we see it now also with all these, the Windmans and all these people who I honestly sometimes feel have more allegiance to Ukraine than to the United States. Nothing bad against Ukraine, but if you are an American politician, I think your first priority should be the United States. And that's exactly this kind of deep state attitude that justifiably so many people are bothered with.
Right. All right. Well, we'll see if this is a template. We have less than a month before our election, so we'll watch it. But thank you for explaining what's going on in Austria and what the will of the people is and how it's kind of okay to care what people of Austria think. That's got to be a thing. So you can follow Ralph. His channel is your show is called Hammer Time on YouTube, and you can find him also on X at. Which one do you want? Raphael? Is this one the one you're using for the? Okay.
Yes, I know that. I have to change. I have to change the name. The name is a funny story. I'll tell one day, but I have to change it to make it easier.
Right.
To say.
Yeah, it's like Schwarzenegger. You gotta meet us where we are. Things that we can spell.
Precisely.
All right. It's always a pleasure to see you, Ralph. Thank you for joining us on Redacted again.
Thanks for having me, Natali. Thank you.
That's going to do it for us today on Redacted. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a big week, a heavy week. I hope you take care of your family, take care of yourself, try to concentrate on these things, and then give yourself a break. That's what I need to do, in fact, regular breaks, trips to Costco. It's what helps me. If I can find toilet paper, because apparently people are mass buying toilet paper again due to the dog strike. So we'll see about that. Anyhow, You don't need to hear about my suburban life. You need to go on with your merry way. Thank you so much. We will be back here live on Monday, live every weekday, every Monday through Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern, and we have content throughout the weekend. We'll see you next week, everybody. Thank you so much.